Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Foss Ribbits, and can I be the only one who's genuinely delighted at the knowledge that a few years after the musical The Apple Tree, you could then go and see Pippin? I find that fact delicious, possibly golden delicious. Well, thank you for tuning in again for another episode of Musical Talk, and this is the second part of our in-depth look at the Royal Scottish Conservatoire's 3 shows for the 2018 Edinburgh Festival Fringe. If you remember, they were Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and then 2 pieces of new writing linked thematically called Legacy, A Mother's Son, and Legacy, Book of Names. Well, last week you could have heard me and Michael Gordon-Shapiro talking about those shows which we saw together and apart. But we weren't the only Musical Talk representatives who saw the shows and loved them. Our old friend David Herzog was also putting on a show up in Edinburgh, and when he wasn't involved in that, he was catching other musical theatre productions, including those at the Royal Scottish Conservatoire. And being a braver, bolder, cleverer man than I, he went and spoke to some of the people involved. So, I think the best thing for me to do is to shut my festering trap and allow someone else to say a few words, maybe rather better words than the ones I can offer. So, let me hand over to the wonderful David Herzog. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Next up, friends, is a pre-show and post-show chat that I had with one of my fellow cast members, actress Daniela May. You may remember her from my previous Juero audio blogs. We caught up during the hustle and bustle of the Fringe to watch 2 productions, both entitled Legacy, the first being Legacy, the Book of Names, and the other one entitled Legacy, A Mother's Song. And these 2 shows were simultaneously being produced by the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland and Northwestern University, a college in the United States. Now, this was an interesting dichotomy of musical theatre pieces that fascinated Daniela and I when we read the Fringe brochure. They seemed to be 2 cohesive titles under the same title banner. And here is how the Fringe brochure described one of the pieces, Legacy, A Mother's Song. What makes a mother? For some, it's biological, but it's also about instinct, responsibility, what you teach and pass on. 3 women at different times in history, but each on the verge of motherhood, find connection through the traditional Scottish songs passed down their family tree. The family stories embedded in these songs help guide each of them through events and decisions that have the potential to change their lives forever. A new musical featuring a contemporary folk score and a cast of actor-musicians. So again, that was the synopsis given for Legacy, A Mother's Song. And next we have the synopsis for Legacy, the Book of Names. And in the brochure, the synopsis given was this. They traveled from around the world. They came for a better life. They arrived at Ellis Island. This new musical takes you on a journey to the greatest immigration station in all of history and shows how one day can change a lifetime. Families are reunited, lovers are forever bound, and new destinies are discovered. And it all happens on a small island in a bay at the edge of a dream called America. Now, at the time we recorded our first chat, this was all the information we had. Let's go now to the chat that Daniela and I had, both pre-show and post-show, for one of these pieces, Legacy, the Book of Names.
Musical Talk.
Hello, Musical Talkers. We're hanging outside of Assembly Hall. It's me and Ms. Daniela May, who's starring in Fiddle with us. And hello, Daniela. How are you?
Hello. Good, good.
Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm so excited you're seeing the show with me today.
Me too. We're really excited. So the show we're seeing today is Legacy, the Book of Names. Is that right?
Indeed, yeah.
I was reading the description earlier, Really interesting. It's new writing. Wondering what the musical kind of score is going to be like.
Yeah, we have no idea at the moment, do we?
No, not
What
at
to
all.
expect in
But
that
definitely,
sense.
it's definitely an interesting story. So it's the promise of America. So it's the immigration to America. So
Yeah.
it's them arriving, and the Book of Names, I'm guessing, is linked into that of the names of people that are arriving somehow.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Yeah, because like you were saying, it's all about like the immigration story of the U.S. From what I gather from just looking at the website, same as you. And yeah, so everybody would, a lot of the immigrants in like the turn of the century would like arrive at the Statue of Liberty, arrive at Ellis Island. They'd get all their names signed in a massive book. They get asked all the questions, a lot of the same questions we get asked when we go through Border Patrol, when we go through another country today, like who are you, where are you from, why are you visiting? And back then they used to say, do you have any diseases? Do you have any of that kind of thing? And they would write it all in these big books. So yeah, I reckon you must be right. It has to have something to do with that, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that's looking really interesting. It's going to be an interesting story, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the music and how that ties in with that, I think.
Yeah, it could be period music. It could be something completely different.
Yeah,
We don't know yet.
we're waiting to be surprised, I think, with that.
Yeah, obviously I'm very interested because it's America, it's American history, it's immigration history, which I'm also very fascinated by. A lot of Americans are, because most of us have only been there for 2 or 3 generations at most, you know what I mean? Is this a part of American history that fascinates you at all?
It does. Unfortunately, I don't know very much about it, so it intrigues me I probably know the bare bones. So we're probably going to get 2 different perspectives, because you probably know a lot more than I do, and I just know the bare bones of the immigration history of America, but it definitely interests me. So yes, I'm interested to see what the story is like.
Yeah, we'll see how we feel when we come out. We'll see, whether it's made sense to you and whether whether it's all come across appropriately. And yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what our 2 perspectives will be like.
Musical talk.
So we've just finished seeing Legacy, Book of Names. And Daniela, what are your first thoughts?
Really, really good. An exceptionally strong cast.
Very strong cast.
Really, really strong. Some great talent on the stage, and some really just highlight moments within it and within the piece as well. An interesting piece, interesting to watch, and yeah, exciting piece, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, I really enjoyed it as well, and I'm going to be looking very much forward to talking with the cast on Sunday about this particular one. We have a whole other second half of it to see tomorrow. It's going to be completely different, I'd imagine, but because they did say they're basically 2 standalone pieces, but
different cast as well, I think.
I think so as well. But we'll find out about that tomorrow. But yeah, you enjoyed the piece today.
Definitely, yes. Well worth it.
I did as well. I couldn't remember the names of the songs. They're not printed in the program, which is a shame.
Yeah, it's a shame.
Nothing necessarily memorable, but to me, that's not necessarily what makes a good score.
It's true.
Personally.
Yeah, it's true.
A lot of
Yeah, there
people
wasn't
say-
a standout.
There's not one that you sort of leave humming, but to me that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like for me, there are plenty of shows that I've left absolutely adoring, but I can't remember any of the songs.
Yeah,
That's not important
Yeah,
to me.
it's not important to be going away humming it. No, there was moments that I remember from within the show where I remember thinking, "Oh God, that's a beautiful little section. I like that harmony. I love, I love what they're doing with that." I can't necessarily remember them afterwards or hum them, but I don't think that takes it away from it being really nice in parts.
A lot of things that are memorable are things that are repetitive, and there wasn't anything that needed to be repetitive.
It wasn't that
in it.
style, though. I wouldn't say
No, it's not.
It wasn't that style.
And there's a lot of musicals and famous songs that we know because they've been repeated to us a lot. Like I've always said before, like would anybody necessarily remember the music of Oklahoma if we didn't have the wonderful movie to remind us?
That's true.
That's a bit cynical because I love Oklahoma. But any musical, like unless people sort of play the albums over again, what is a memorable song really?
They had some really nice influences though. There was lovely influence in that duet between the young girl and the Greek older lady.
Yeah.
There was some great Greek music in the background. Just
There was.
Because I picked up on that and I thought, "Oh, God, that's great." That just slightly Greek sounding within the instruments, not so much within the singing.
Because they only had a stand-up bass, they had a violin
And keys. Yeah.
And I didn't notice if there were any moments like that where they sort of snuck in the cultural influences. It was either like intentionally subtle or it
it added to the characters and it added to the stories they were telling, because I did not necessarily notice that in that nice little upbeat number.
I only noticed it, it was very subtle, really, really subtle, but it was a great little moment.
It was a lovely song. And in general, what would you say the style of the music is in it?
Initially, you would go period. No, it was a period piece, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was period music at all. Yeah, it did have some very modern harmony lines as well within what they were doing.
And very well used. I'll be able to ask them this when I chat with them on Sunday, but it could be, very intentional on their part that because they have so many cultures being represented on stage, they need something nice and general.
True, to
bring
just
it
go
in
straight down the middle and
to keep the scope of the piece. So it could be completely intentional on that part or not, but it would be interesting to find out.
How
they weave that in.
Definitely.
Now I'm just interested in getting your perspective, especially on. You've been to the U.S. and you've visited the U.S. You know American culture. You love American culture. We talk about it all the time. But what is your perspective being from Britain and seeing this sort of a very American piece of history and very American story?
It was really interesting, and I think it came across brilliantly, because shame on me, didn't realise that there was a book of names on Ellis Island, and so that was interesting to hear about at the end. But the story worked amazingly. It is kind of a generic story, should I say, as in it did reminisce a little bit for me of that Titanic kind of story, which I felt very much, which obviously everybody knows, so you did kind of parallel it to that in my mind.
Really.
You can't,
it's the same time, essentially, same story.
Same sort of impetus of them going over by ferry and the such like. But no, it worked brilliantly, and it was really interesting. It was interesting to me that they were all treated fairly, although they were sent back if they did have medical issues that came across in that piece. And I guess they touched on the fact that they did get sick on the boat over.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to me that they were treated really well once they got there. Not knowing anything about it, I didn't or wouldn't have thought that would have been the case.
And that could have been slightly whitewashed.
Okay.
I would assume so. Just because if you assume in the time period people are, rushed to get you in, rushed to get you out, and people are a lot less kind in general, and times are a lot more harsh.
Yeah.
There were other things they didn't whitewash, which I did appreciate.
Okay.
The fact that the mother, the Albanian mother, telling the little girl, I want you to look perfect. I want everything to be perfect when we arrive on shore, is very of the time.
Yeah.
Now we sort of have the lovely attitude of it's okay to not be okay, but back then it wasn't necessarily okay to be
keeping up appearances in the show, definitely.
And that's kind of a new thing for us, but certainly back then it would still very much have been that motto, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it was maybe just a little bit of poetic license with that bit. I just imagined that there'd be a little bit more, which maybe they just didn't want to include for the story, a little bit more of maybe death and illness within them staying on Ellis Island before they were let out, and maybe a little bit of mistreatment to all the ones that couldn't make themselves known, language problems and there's such like a mental health problems. I would imagined it was, or I can imagine that it was probably a little bit more harsh than what they portrayed.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But then, we're looking at something that was very dark as it was, so I don't know how many people would want to sit there for an hour watching something even more dark than the subject matter itself. So I can probably, that's maybe a question for the cast, but I can probably imagine that was a definite decision or something that came about throughout the devising process to just try and lift it a little bit and make sure that it wasn't going right down to the depths.
That's an excellent point, and I guess from an emotional standpoint I did appreciate the levels that they had in there, but you're absolutely right in terms of the harshness of the reality. They were being treated very nicely by the staff, or what we assume is nice for the time period, and then like you said, there wasn't as much sort of physical harshness either. We really only have the one tragedy at the end of the show, and that's it, and the rest seem to be kind of happy endings, which that sounds really lucky to me, really, doesn't it?
That's something that did cross my mind after watching it. It was just that poor one guy that had to go back home,
dude,
and everybody else went off and lived a very happy life, and everything was great, which yeah, it leaves a nice feeling at the end of the show, I guess.
It does, and like you say, it doesn't drag you down too much. It's still a very enjoyable piece. So it could be very intentional on their part. It'll be interesting to see how they did that in the devising process.
Maybe it's a question for the cast that I'd just like to ask them with the whole devising process, with them being in two separate countries, how that kind of worked, and whether they had certain people that just took charge of certain areas. Because I know with devising, like even being in the same room is hard enough to kind of devise a piece. So with it being in two separate countries, and two separate cast members, I guess, really, how it was rehearsed and how it was devised and all of that. That's really interesting, actually. Perhaps something that only they will be able to answer.
Musical talk.
There you have it. So as you can tell, we enjoyed the piece immensely. Unfortunately, we were not able to conduct a pre- and post-show chat regarding Legacy, A Mother's Song, but thanks to the help of Linda Robertson from RCS and Brandon Bowers from Northwestern, I was able to obtain an exclusive chat with 4 of Legacy's cast members, 2 from A Mother's Song, and 2 again from the Book of Names. Here is the amazing interview I had with them.
Musical talk for UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Sandra Gidlove. I'm Alex in A Legacy, A Mother's Song.
Francis Arroyo Lopez, the reader in Legacy, The Book of Names.
Brandon Bowers, producing director of the American Music Theatre Project at Northwestern University.
Pablo Lazarica, I play Simon Kaplan in Legacy, The Book of Names.
Chloe Howard, I play Sarah in Legacy, A Mother's Song.
So friends, we're coming to you live from Assembly Hall. We are talking to the cast and creatives of 2 productions under the same banner of Legacy, A Book of Names and Legacy, A Mother's Song, which you've heard Danielle and I discussing already pre- and post-show. So first we're talking with Brandon, who is one of the producers of, is it both the pieces that you're technically a producer of?
Yes.
Excellent. So tell us all about how this got started. So the Northwestern University and Royal Conservatoire of Scotland partnership has been going on for at least 2 years now.
2 years.
Tell us how that got started, please.
Yeah, so the former head of the master's program at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, Andrew Panton, got in touch with our artistic director of the American Music Theatre Project at Northwestern, David Bell. The master's program has always had these shows at the Fringe, and they've been trying to do new work. Okay. And they got put in touch with us because at AMTP at Northwestern, we focus in developing new musicals on Northwestern's campus. So they got together and kind of concocted this beautiful program where the AMTP and Northwestern oversee the development of the 2 new musicals, something that we've been doing for years. And then the RCS will then produce those 2 musicals with students from both universities as the cast. So this really beautiful partnership and equal parity and between developing and then producing 2 new musicals and putting the students at the center of that development and really giving them the tools to develop those musicals in the room with the artists and throughout the entire process.
And so how did that particular aspect of it work? So for instance, were the 2 casts, was it just the American school for one cast, just the Scottish school for one cast? Were they mixed? And then how much were they involved in the writing process as well?
Yeah, so in January, all of the creatives for both of the shows, there's one American team and one Scottish-British team. They come to the Royal Conservatoire in January, and we spend 2 weeks with the entire RCS class. And spend 2 weeks kind of workshopping new material, devising, getting to know all of them, and then the writers go off and write for a good long while. And then at the beginning of June, all those writers then reconvene in Chicago at Northwestern with the Northwestern students who are selected, and then do a week-long workshop of the musicals doing a full reading. So we get them up on their feet a little bit, get those started, and then we bring over all 11 of our students and our creatives for rehearsals starting in halfway through July.
Right.
And the casts are split up evenly between the 2. So they're 15 and 15, equally split between Northwestern and Royal Conservatoire students.
And is it literally like half and half for each show, or is it literally just the Northwestern students are in this one and the RCS students are in this one?
It's half and half. It's like 10 RCS students and like 5 Northwestern students in each cast.
Okay, we did wonder. Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah. And it is equal between all of like the roles as well. A lot of parity in between those as well. So there's Northwestern students and scenes with RCS students and really intermixing the 2 throughout both of the shows.
Okay, so now we're talking to the cast of a couple of different shows. So first, I would like to chat with the 2 lovely folks from Book of Names. That was the first one that we saw. There's not technically an order that these shows are supposed to be seen in. They're under the same banner, but they're 2 separate productions. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think most of us like to call them sister shows or twin shows, whatever you might call them.
Yeah.
It's Legacy, whatever the actual title is. And so the things that connect the two shows is really the word legacy, bloodlines, family, generations. And that being said, between the two shows, it's not like one's a sequel or anything like that.
They all really deal with heritage, basically.
Yeah, essentially.
And family, and etc.
For sure.
Now, are you all students of the same school? Have you all come from... No.
No. So Pablo and I both go to Northwestern.
I see.
Yes.
And
And Francis and me, Sandra, we're from RCS. We're in Conservatoire.
You've sat very nicely then. So we have Book of Names, Mother Song over here, and over here we have RCS, and over there we have... Well done. Did you do that on purpose?
It's all good.
Actors coordinate. We're very, very good at this. Okay, lovely. So, next question will be for you. How involved were you all with the writing process of these different shows? Did you purely take on, say, Mother's Song? This is the RCS side, isn't it?
Yeah, this is RCS.
Mother's Song.
It is Mother's Song, Book of Names. Yeah.
So, did you have any input with the writing of your particular show and or with Mother's Song?
Yeah, we had some workshops in January with both teams, with the Mother Song and Book of Names.
Okay.
And we all did different type of improvisations and just to see different type of works, to see the creatives, then to get ideas to then develop both plays, actually. Yeah. So we did had a really important impact in both processes. In terms of the Book of Names, when we got casted and divided in our own shows, that would be like in March, something like that.
Sure,
That's soon.
And then
June.
Yeah,
it was in like late July for us. We didn't find out until the end of June.
RCS found out earlier than Northwestern.
Yeah,
we found out Northwesterners found out like 2 weeks before we got here.
We showed up. Yeah,
it's like great. So much preparation.
But yeah, in terms of the Book of Names, my character, the reader, was one that we started developing now, like 3 weeks after opening the show. They haven't written the whole parts, and I got to work with Casey Kendall, who's the writer of the play, and we got working in the monologues, 3 different monologues and 2 different people, based on a real book of Ellis Island interviews. So it was really lovely to work with him one-on-one, and like my perspective as an actor and his perspective as a writer. It was a really lovely process.
How much of these stories used in the pieces are true stories? And how much of your own research did you have to do to look into these for the writing process? For instance, for Book of Names, were these the stories of real people who came to Ellis Island? And then conversely for Mother's Song, were these the story of 3 actual generations of women, or was it different for both pieces?
Not for Mother's Song.
That's fictional.
Okay.
Mother's Song is not based on a true story, but I think you guys know.
Book of Names.
I was going to say, this is where interviewing 2 different shows and 2 different casts becomes... I'm starting to weave and cross lines in my brain. But so, go ahead and tell me more about that process.
Yeah, so the Book of Names was actually very interesting. So
I got to see actually some footage.
Yeah, exactly. So like Francis said, they workshopped Book of Names. When they workshopped it with Royal Conservatoire, they workshopped it with them. That was just like they had idea, they had a few songs. Then they came to Northwestern at the end of our school year, and they showed us this documentary. Yeah. It was about 45 minutes long. I forget the name of it. But it showed us like living conditions of Ellis Island, a few stories about people, a few like dramatic reenactments, stuff like that. And while I don't think there is a single character in our show that is an actual person.
Okay. The monologues are
besides the monologues.
I imagine so.
The reader, the 3 persons selected from the book of the Ellis Island interview book.
Okay.
That the writer extracted.
Yeah, which Casey, or the writer of the book, excellently incorporated into the story because just the reader holding the book as they're reading actual stories. But we saw in the documentary stories about like a father who had come to America a few months before his family, and his family was coming on the boat, and he hadn't seen bananas before, which there's a song about bananas in our show. That's a great time. And he took a rowboat out to the ship as it was coming in and held up bananas so his children could see it. And so they took little bits and pieces of like true stories, things like that, kind of a historical fiction, if you will, with Book of Names. So.
Brilliant. So conversely then, for Mother's Song, if these were not based on original stories, then how did the writing process for this come about? Where did the idea for Mother's Name come from? Do you know?
So Finn is a composer and he is from Scotland, so I think he got all the folk songs that came from Scotland to Ireland and then Ireland to America.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he found his inspiration in the folk music song, and that's why also he put in actor-musician in his play. So I'm playing the violin in the play.
Yes.
So he wanted to incorporate the the instruments that we all can play as well. So yeah, it's been interesting, the whole folk music incorporated with the history from the traveling songs, you can say.
And how much involvement did you have, again, in this writing process, since it was different? It wasn't based so much on actual stories. It was based on history, of course. But then how much involvement did the two of you have?
So for us, since they had a bit of like a devising thing, and so that was when you guys actually came up with like what the genesis of the story was, and like the song Words Are Not Enough, that was the only song that was written at that time, and maybe a couple others that maybe ended up being cut. But so when they did it, they kind of all developed that at RCS, and then at Northwestern we kind of had a fuller, more developed script. And from that, basically I worked with Finn a lot, just like when he would teach me the music, and certain things that were like, oh, well, we wouldn't say this in America, we would say this. That type of stuff was more, but it was much more fully developed. Mother Song was much more fully developed when we worked on it at Northwestern. And mostly just like little things like that, little tweaks and whatever. And Finn and Tanya were very like receptive to wanting to know that type of stuff and to make changes for this. But I think Book of Names definitely, because I also worked in Book of Names at the workshop. And that definitely changed so much more from when we worked on it in June to now than Mother Song, just because at that point they were just at different points in their development, because you guys had done so much more development for Mother Song earlier. So by the time we got it, much of it had been done. But Book of Names, I worked a lot with Casey on one of the character that I played in the reading. I worked with him a lot on developing that, and like he wanted to make sure that I felt like what is her name now in this?
Katrina now.
Katrina. So the character that is now Katrina, I worked on making sure she had agency in the story, and not just like this man comes and says he wants to marry you, and okay, like just making sure that like she had her own story and her own want. So that was really cool for me to feel like I could, and then to see where it came now, being not involved with the rehearsal process in Glasgow, to see this character that I did feel like I had a bit of a say in, to be fully developed. And so that was really awesome, and I've never been able to be involved in a musical process like that before, so it's really cool.
How have you all gelled as two different schools, two different casts working together? What's it been like working with each other? I'll bring that one back to you. You can all answer if you want.
Yeah, but it's been amazing. Like for us, it's been like the inspiration from you guys coming from America, and energy. Like energy-wise, and everything. Like
we are very energetic, aren't we?
No, so it's been a joy working with the Americans. Yeah, I love them. They're cool.
We've been together almost like 10 months with the same people.
And
to be able to now work with other like
new fresh energy,
imaginative and performers and artistic people from the other side is amazing, and it's really lovely. Like we loved it. We really loved it.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like we're so used to, at our school we have a much bigger program than you guys do, but like still just having people that you don't know, and like that have such a different experience from you, and like especially like just people from, I thought it was going to be mostly Scottish people at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, and it wasn't. And there was so many like people from literally all over the world. So that's been so amazing, because most people at Northwestern are like just from the US. So it was just so cool to be working so closely with people from completely different backgrounds.
Absolutely. I remember the first rehearsal that we had for Book of Names when we came in. The Americans came in first day. Our director hadn't flown in yet. There was something, he had to come in 2 days later. So we only had John teaching the music, John Bowerfield, who's the composer, and Casey Kendall leading rehearsal. We get there and we're learning music, and then I'm just like, because there's that nerve of just like seeing new people, and then it's like completely different, like culture shock, really. Plus, also the Americans flew to Glasgow for the rehearsal process, and like we rehearsed for like half a month in Glasgow, and then we came here to Edinburgh to put on the show. So like we're dealing with all these new like culture, like trash cans are bins, and like
the main one,
part of the fun,
and stuff like that. And then we came in, and then meeting these people was like, you can tell the first day there's those nerves, but we adapted into each other, and like we really like fed off of each other's energy. Like each group from the different schools had such different energy that like contributed to making this like beautiful piece of work, and I'm so grateful for that.
So. That's brilliant. I know you guys are on a very tight schedule today, and I could talk to you on and on about these pieces. We found them very, very fascinating. Definite thing that I want to have you each have a time to discuss with us are your individual characters, which I know for you in particular, there's quite a few characters that you end up playing, which is great. Or just talk about the concept of the reader in general, and sort of what this whole process has meant to you, particularly your individual pieces as well, and the roles you play. Let me start with you, Chloe, and we'll go around.
Yeah, playing Sarah has been really interesting because I feel like she's dealing with pressure from a lot of different areas in her life. She talks about being like on having time off from her job and having, obviously her partner and like her girlfriend trying to figure out what they're moving into a new place, and also she's been neglecting this box that she knows she needs to open, and she's been putting it off, and like putting all these things off. And then I finally feel like for me, Sarah, like once she finally gets in the house and sets up, and she can finally give herself the time to actually pay attention to what she's been ignoring so long from her family, and whether that has to do with maybe them not being the most supportive of her at the time in her life when she came out, or all like for whatever reason that she's decided to kind of put her family and her heritage aside, she's drawn back to it. And I've just found it so, just her journey in not only discovering where she came from, but also where she's going, and that there's someone that she loves who is in the way, and she doesn't want, she wants Alex so badly to be a part of her where she's going, but it can't be the case, and so she has to be strong and has to say, okay, this isn't the right thing, and I think that it's so beautiful working on her has been so beautiful because she really becomes who she is by looking in the past, and I love the music also is amazing, and I've loved just being able to sing Finn's music, and it's so tied to who she is as a character, her style of her songs, and yeah, it's just been really beautiful to explore the story and the way that it all comes about by me dealing with every other character in the show, whether directly or just by reading about them.
Sure. Yeah. I did realize I said we were going to go around this way, but I think it makes more sense to talk to you since we've just mentioned Alex.
Yes.
So let's go to Alex directly herself. Yeah. Same question for you then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me personally, the whole thing has been a really experience since English is not my native language. So like doing everything in English and all the lines in the script, and like working with the director as well, like everything's been new to me, so I'm really grateful for that opportunity as well. But Alex, I think obviously she's very important in Sarah's life and in Sarah's journey, and the whole thing when it actually come to this point that Sarah wants children and Alex doesn't want children, and like their love is so strong, but at that point it's like something doesn't work out. Like for Alex, this is not what she wants, and she's very strongly about that as well. Mm-hmm. So it's a really big breakup scene, and it's like of course it takes on both of them, but I think Alex is really like, okay, this is it, because she's so nice to Sarah the whole play. Like she's understandable, she's like trying to figure out what she's doing and what she's dealing with, and Sarah's not quite letting her in either. So it's a struggle for Alex, but at the end it's like, no, this is it. Like you need to choose. So
that's lovely, and that definitely comes across. It's a heck of a crossroads. It's a heck of a problem that your characters get put into. I mean, for all of you, but that definitely comes across. And what will you take most from this show and this whole process once it's all done?
Yeah, this is my first acting musician play.
Okay.
So I'm going to take that with me, and that's the most. It's a great experience for that. Like
absolutely, very
playing
cool.
the violin and singing at the same time, and also the whole work experience with amazing people, with Finn and Tanya, and the whole experience. I'm going to take that with me.
Lovely, and let's go to the reader of the Book of Names and hear about, tell us more about that role and what it was like getting involved in that for you, and what you're going to take from the piece as well once it's done.
The reader, my character, is when we started to develop it, which was 3 weeks before the opening, and even the day of opening day, I had new monologues that day. So it was really creative process, one-on-one with the writer. The idea was to find 3 different interviews of real characters and then base the monologue of those 3. Casey had a really clear idea of what he wanted. Like he wanted children like Rivka Dardashi, she's 9 years old. Then the story of Maria Espinosa, 37 years old, about being 9 people in their own family and traveling to America, which is
how many
amazing.
made it out? I forget how the story
7.
goes. Yes, yeah.
7. And then we have the first one, who's Robert Wilson, which is actually Sofia Cruz, that she just dressed as a man to disguise.
That's the one you start with.
Yeah, that's the first one. And like Pablo said, like Rivka Dardashi, she never saw a banana in her life, and that's where she's encountering that first experience, which is lovely. So it was really to be based on the history of what really happened in Ellis Island. Yeah. I think the reader is the soul of the play, the reality, because there is the real facts.
Yeah.
And
it
people,
comes across that way. It comes across as a good spine for the piece.
And I remember Ryan Cunningham and David Bell, be as truthful as possible. Like, you are the narrator, you're telling a story. And people don't know those facts. They didn't know that bananas didn't exist in America.
Right.
That
I certainly didn't. That was new for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
America.
it's just it's really interesting. That's the moment where the people, as the audience, connect with Ellis Island in the moment and be like, oh my God, I didn't know that. I didn't know they suffer for that. So it was really, really interesting to work that. And as an actor and the writer, I never had that opportunity to work directly with the writer.
Sure.
And it's amazing. And what do I take from this experience? Everything, I think. The John and Casey are exceptional. David Bell and Ryan Cunningham are, oh my God, they're geniuses. Our directors, the whole creative team were really, really supportive to us on the Royal Conservatoire Scotland team. And I think it's been a wonderful experience here at the Fringe. Yeah, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Last but not least, sir.
Oh, man.
Your thoughts?
So Simon Kaplan, a Polish immigrant coming to Ellis Island in 1920s. So, he's such an interesting character because he opens the show and he closes the show with the same song in a building on an island in a bay. And when I have a joke that it's crazy how inconsistent his character is because when it's not actually inconsistent, but when we did the workshop, his name was Seamus McNally. He was Irish. Then I came here, and now his name was Simon Wexler, and then it changed to Simon Kaplan. Then it changed to Shimon Kaplan. Then it changed back to Simon Kaplan. It was great. But really, even though it went through all these changes, and it was mostly Casey Kendall doing the changes in the character, the consistency of the character, his plot line, the things that he had to go through stayed the same.
Okay.
And I kind of see him as a more moral and emotional crux to this piece that, since he opens and ends the show, as soon as I start standing up, you think that it's Frances, the first person who walks on stage. You think Frances is going to be the person to open the show. She looks at me, and then I start singing, and that's Simon Kaplan. And his whole story, kind of goes along this, the tie of legacy that he's trying to keep his family safe, and in a sad way, of course, because, spoiler alert, am I allowed to say spoilers?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it. As long as you don't mind, we don't mind.
He doesn't make it into America. He gets to Ellis Island, they check his hand, he has a lump on his hand, that's a sign for a larger disease at the time, and they say, you can't come into America. But his wife is fine, she's pregnant, she's newly pregnant, and, he was going to make a new life out of America. Yeah. And this whole time, I've been working with Ryan Cunningham and David Bell, and they said, do you want to win or do you want to lose? And you want to win, of course. So while somebody might receive this news and be devastated and not be able to carry on, can't think of a plan, as soon as he finds out, and when he finds out, that's when I sing the solo of That's What My Father Said, when he starts talking about his father and his legacy, and then carrying it into this this situation with his own unborn child, and saying, you know what, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to be a father to my child no matter what, even if I'm not here for him. And while there's that big duet at the end where we're saying he's talking to his wife Hannah, brilliantly played by Bethany Hughes. She's fantastic. And she's saying, like, listen, like, I know you're saying that it's going to be fine, because he's lying to her saying that it will be when he knows it's not. She says, I know you're saying this, but if it's not, like, what can we do to fix this? And that's when he says, I don't care, I'm happy with what we have. I'm happy, I'm not going to let this ruin me. I'm going to still be a father. And, the show ends with them separating. And then at the very end of the show, I take off my hat and then I become Simon's son, who is now speaking directly to the audience, saying, I'm glad my father did what he had to do, and the strength that he had, I'll never forget what he did, what he sacrificed to get me here. And as myself personally, I'm a son of 2 immigrants who came to America from Cuba. That means that I always connect with that part of the show, and it's a big impact on a family. This kid never got to see his father, and his father's such a good man to do this. But that's the character in a nutshell. Just a strong guy who wants to help.
Well, it's part of the spirit of the piece. It's
exactly.
Brilliant story arc. And so, what are you going to take most from this? What are you going to miss most from this experience?
Man, like most people have already said, just working directly with the writers, the composers, with the directors, trying to just form the show out of thin air. It's beautiful. And I'm definitely going to take that away from me, and just the idea of being strong and maintaining your legacy without, without letting it put a hamper on your a damper on your life and all these things. And me personally, as an actor, I've learned so much over this summer. Also, just performing in the Fringe every other day, that consistency is key. So so much from this opportunity. So
I wanted to add that this play, The Book of Names, really, I remember Ryan Cunningham telling us this. The day he left to America just because he had to go back to Chicago, he was, we already did, the play is already done, you just have to now embrace it and do the work. But you just need to always have in mind the purpose of why are we doing this play. And he started crying. Yeah. And everybody started crying.
Oh man!
Because it's what it is. That was the importance for the writer too. He wanted to compare the America from Ellis Island to the America we have now, and the contrast of what's happening right now.
Yeah.
That's why Rivka says free food, and she's so happy. And then Maria says that the doctors treated everyone for free, and that welcomed America to immigrants and giving everything, health, food, and everything. And to see the contrast right now in America, that was for us, for me as the actor performing the different characters, for me was the set mind and be this is why we do what we do, with the voices and do the change.
Absolutely. And the whole point I think that is most important to take away from this is that while these 2 shows are called Legacy, there's so much more to Legacy than just family. It's about relationships, and it's about what it takes to be this relationship, these blood connections that we have with people, that it's not always good, it's not always happy, there's bad things. This story isn't about family, it's about humans and generations and what it means to be a good person, what it takes, these sacrifices under these struggles. And along with what Ryan was saying, sometimes Legacy isn't as pretty of a story as it is, and that's why I think these 2 pieces are beautiful. The story of motherhood, that motherhood isn't always as beautiful as some people might think, and to other people it is. And with our story with Book of Names, while we take a historical piece, we have stories with these 2 people falling in love at Ellis Island, and at the same time contrasted with a family being split apart. That it's not always the same, but it's life, and that's what we have to go through, and that's what Legacy is.
That is sort of the nice overriding message of the 2 Legacy pieces for Danielle and I when we both saw it. It's not just, to be fair, there are themes of immigration in both shows, but there are these themes of family and of belonging and history. And was there anything that you 2 wanted to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think that Tanya is an absolutely amazing, Tanya Acevedo, amazing director, and I think she did a wonderful job. And Finn, with the writing and the story, just making 3 storylines that happened so long ago, like in the 1600s and the 1800s, and now so similar and so relevant to today, and just even things like abortion and the absolute trauma that is, both from pressure from everyone else and within yourself, that is still such a, like, so many years later. And I think that they did such a wonderful job of making us see how relevant all the stories that happened so long ago still are for us today, I think, in both shows. And yeah, I just really credit Finn and Tanya and John and Casey and Brian and David for really making 2 stories that are so important today and so meaningful today, even though they're about things that are not necessarily happening themselves right now. The themes are all still there. And so yeah, I just feel really grateful to be a part of a show that is able to share these stories, especially of the 3 strong women, directed by a strong woman, and just, you know, like, I don't know, it's just such an awesome way to explore the generations and those themes while also making them relevant to today. So yeah. It's really great.
Yeah, I can just agree. Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good. Yeah.
I do have one more question. Does anybody know about the life of these 2 pieces once they go beyond the Fringe? Is that I really hope to see these pieces stretched out, elongated, done elsewhere. Anybody know?
We really hope so, but we haven't heard anything yet.
Okay.
But
yeah, hopefully. The American Music Theater Project at Northwestern they develop new work all the time, like every quarter. So it's possible that it would be maybe in next year, a couple years after that the shows would come back to be developed and workshopped into fuller length pieces, just so that they're not confined for the hour that it has to be for the Fringe slot. Nothing of that is set in stone, but that's kind of what AMTP is for. So I'm sure it would be amazing if it could be used at Northwestern to continue working on these specific pieces. So we'll see.
We would definitely love that.
Yeah.
So
it's great to have the work at the very least.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. Guys, these are absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. Absolutely delightful pieces. And thank you so much for making time for us today. We sure appreciate it. On your last days of the Festival Fringe. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Musical talk.
My thanks again to Brandon Bowers, Linda Robertson, and the casts of Legacy for taking the time to chat with me. I had a great time. For Legacy, A Mother's Song, I gave 4 stars. I wrote the show up as a touching journey through family history, heritage, and culture. A beautiful piece. Now, though the show had some difficulties getting the story across, often that has much to do with the tight times we are kept to at the Fringe itself, it was still lacking in some plot points for me. I, for one, would have loved to have heard more of the Scottish folk music that was mentioned in the actual online and brochure synopsis for the show. All in all, though, a wonderful piece, and brilliantly performed by everyone in the cast. For Legacy, The Book of Names, I gave 5 stars, and I wrote that show up as poignant, rhythmic. It tugs at the heartstrings. American or otherwise, immigrant or descendant thereof, you will love these stories. Well done to the cast and crew on a stellar onstage job, and well done to the writers for a stunning piece. I really do hope to see both of these shows taken further and adapted for venues beyond the Fringe. It would be great to see them running in rep in other locations as full-length musicals.
Musical talk. David Herzog there, and it's always a joy listening to him, and it's always a joy listening to him talking to other people, in this case talking about those shows presented by the Royal Scottish Conservatoire last year at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. A real insight, I think, into what it is to put on new work. And I think it would be wrong of me not to mention an old friend of this programme, Finn Anderson, the amazing Scottish composer who was responsible for Legacy, A Mother's Song. He's very easy to find online, and I think you should go and have a look now. And I know he's recently been working on his new album, so go online and see if you can find that. Details on his webpage, but you can also follow him on Twitter. And all the usual social networks. Well, I think that draws this episode of Musical Talk to an end. I'll just check. Well, nobody seems to be saying anything, so that must be the end of all the useful stuff. In which case, I don't propose to sit here humming for another week until the next episode comes along, just to keep you entertained. I've got things to do. Some dusting for a start. So, I'm going to go. And I think the best way for me to signify that is with one single word. And if you'd like to know what it is now, keep your ears open. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by David Herzog and edited by Thos Ribbits and David Herzog. Copyright Musical Talk 2019. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos.